now we're ready for the new muscles, the session 6 muscles. The session 6 muscles are going to take up where the bicep tricep area left off, and we're going to be moving into the elbow, wrist, and a little bit into the hand. At the elbow, the muscles that flex the elbow, of course, the biceps, brachialis, brachioradialis, and the long head biceps, which I sometimes think of as a separate muscle. Those are the muscles that flex the elbow. Now, the motions that go on at the elbow and wrist that are very important are supination and pronation. And supination is carried out partly at the elbow and partly in through the wrist. And it has to do with an external rotation of the forearm. So there is a muscle that's primarily devoted to supination. It's called the supinator. Now the way we test the supinator muscle, and this isn't the only way to test it, but this is the way I've been testing it for years. I learned this from Dr. Francis years ago. You bring the arm out into abduction, about neutral shoulder, and full supination. You come in here, you grab the patient's hand like you're shaking hands, and I'm going to support her elbow, and I'm going to twist this way. I'm going to try to take her into pronation, and she's going to resist. Hold. And that's really good. Hold there. Now, the other muscle that's involved with supination is going to be, to some degree, the biceps and the brachioradialis. They're going to be helping to supinate from a pronated position. But this muscle here is what really takes the supination to the full degree. It's also a very important muscle for protecting and managing the head of the radius when it's under load. Very important muscle. The other major motion, of course, is pronation. There's two muscles that we test that are involved in pronation, the pronator teres and the pronator quadratus. Pronator teres comes from the medial elbow and anchors about midway, not quite halfway down the radius. And so when that muscle contracts, it does this kind of motion, like that. Now the pronator quadratus goes from the ulna, the distal ulna, to the distal radius. And the fibers run at about that angle. This would be straight across the wrist. They're at about that angle. So when they contract, they actually do this. They're not only doing this, they're also helping to keep their ulnus and the ulna and the radius together. They're what give a lot of what give the wrist integrity. So the way we test those is similar, except for the bend in the elbow. I'll come in and have the patient hold my hand like we're arm wrestling. And we want them at about a little less than 90 degrees. This is for the pronator teres. And I want you to roll your wrist in this way. Hold there. I'm going to take you out of that position. Now they'll want to abduct their arm. Hold there. Hold. You want to keep that from happening. There. Very good. Hold there. And I might test it in different positions. Now to get out to pronator quadratus, we fully flex the elbow, fully internally rotate the wrist. Hold there. And I'm stabilizing here, and I'm going to take her out, or attempt to take her into supination. That's very good. Here's the other side. Pronator teres. Hold. No, a little bit. There you go. Hold there. And that one might be need a little attention. Come all the way up this way. Hold there. Hold. Hold there. I'm going this way. Hold there. And yeah, so there's a little something we might need to fix there. But that's not too bad. That's how we test those two muscles. Now, the other thing that happens at the wrist is flexion and extension. And there's two groups that are involved with flexion and two groups involved with extension. we have the flexor carpi ulnaris, and we have the flexor carpi radialis. We have the extensor carpi ulnaris, and we have the extensor carpi radialis. The way we test those, first I'll test them as a group, wrist flexors in general. We test flexors with the elbow bent, close to the side, make a fist, roll it in this way. If we can see, hold there, hold. And that's pretty good. I'll show you on this side, make a fist, roll it in this way. Hold there, good, hold, good. Some people will actually hold the wrist this way. I like to get as broad a contact as possible. Wrist extension, we like to test with the elbow straight. So you can bring yourself up against the arm, keep the elbow straight, make a fist, roll it back. I'll support the elbow with this hand. I'll support the arm with this arm and hold. And let it go. There, she's already tried. Hold there. Good. So I'm supporting the arm and elbow and trying to take her into flexion. Same thing on this side, coming this way, make a fist come up this way, and hold. So I might support here, elbow straight, there you go. If her elbow stays straight, I'll come down here. If the elbow's wanting to bend, then I'll come up and I'll support the elbow. I prefer to do it this way, but either way you're going to get a good test that way. So those are the extensor carpi ulnaris and radialis as a group. Now, if we want to test the radialis and ulnaris individually, of course, make a fist, roll it this way. You're going to emphasize, hold there, and then you're going to emphasize the radius there, and emphasize the ulnaris there. Same with this. Test, the extensor test, bring your wrist back. So I'm going to have the patient kind of roll the wrist this way, there you go, and like radially deviate, hold there. Good, and then I'm going to have you deviate, and I'll use my other hand because it gives me a better vector. And you can really dial in, dial in the test that way. Show it here on this side again. Hold there. This is would be for the, hold there, you okay? Mm-hmm. Hold there. So that would be the ulnaris, and then right here the radialis. And finally, with the forearm and wrist muscles. So we talked about wrist flexion, wrist extension, wrist pronation, wrist supination. We also have the finger extensors and the finger flexors. Now, we can test those the same way we would the wrist extensors. Go ahead and now go ahead and just make a fist, roll it back. Now hold. So I would test the wrist extensors that way. Now I might have you bring your hand up this way, and then you want a softer touch here. Hold. And I'm going to see if those wrist extensors and those hold pretty good. You can test them individually. It depends on what you're working on. If you're working on a long-standing, forearm, elbow, wrist injury, something, push back. You might want to get real detailed with this. You'll find all kinds of missing links that have been maybe missed. So once again, hold there. Now to test the finger flexors, same idea. You would go into the position you would to test the wrist flexors, and where would go ahead and make a fist. And so we'd be like this, hold. Now just open up your hand and bring your hand in this way. Elbow come in, there you go. Hold there, hold. And we can test, and that's a very functional test. I mean, this is something we need to do throughout our day, is use our fingers and wrists in that way. You can also test it in neutral. Hold there, hold. You can test this way, you know, like the, hold there. Try to pull the